When people are looking for a natural way, they don't know where to go because they're asking their doctors, and their doctors don't know a natural way. Now, having said that, I have to say, I have a lot of doctors who have joined our academy in many of our study groups. It's happening much faster now in the last 3 or 4 years than it ever has. A lot of pharmacists, a lot of doctors, naturopaths, functional MDs, physical therapists, nurses, physician's assistants, but mostly what I teach are moms and grandmothers. We have men too. We have firefighters, we have engineers, but my philosophy is that a lot of the healing needs to be done in the home. If we outsource our wellness to someone else, then we have to expect that someone else's ideas will prevail. If we don't agree with those ideas, or we don't like where they're coming from, we're not happy with that, then we have no choice. But we always have a choice if we decide we're going to try to do this ourselves. And so I have study groups. It's called Gateway to Homeopathy. I started a study group myself when I was first learning this back in the 80s with a few friends, and I found it to be so efficacious. We would meet every Thursday night. We did it for 4 years. I wouldn't have missed a single night of it. It was our nourishment. At the time, we were all having our first babies, and we kind of needed each other. And that's how I have fashioned these study groups that I run now, Gateway to Homeopathy, is that I encourage mostly mothers and grandmothers, but also we have men. We also have one men's group that's called No Girls Allowed, and it's just men, and they all study together. It's run by a fellow who's been following me for years, and he's a pharmacist, a retired pharmacist. So it appeals to a lot of different kinds of people, but those of us who are in the home need to know what to do instead of freaking and thinking, oh my gosh, my child's got a fever. Holy cow, I got to do this. I got to take this. I got to go into the waiting room. Or, oh my goodness, my daughter, is having her menses and she's in pain. Now we must take her to an OBGYN. There is a lot that can be done with a little bit of knowledge from the home, in the home, when the mother, grandmother, family members put their thinking towards learning some homeopathy.
So let's go there. So let's start talking about that because, so I've had, we're soon to celebrate the first year of the podcast. And in that time, Joette, I have just had such an incredible roster of guests struggling with so many different things. And their one unifying factor is that at some point the switch flipped and they found gratitude, which is a very helpful practice, to mindset optimization and to helping them move forward in a way that begat their success. However, previous to that, they were all struggling with something. And when I think back on some of those somethings, what I realize is that there is often homeopathic remedies, or when I say solutions, I think homeopathic elements that could support them in feeling better, in overcoming, right? So like, instead of saying like, it's the cure, because I think that's where people get hung up. Like, is it going to be I think if we could just have something to support us in getting past life's hard moments, wouldn't that be preferable to either turning maybe to a medicine with side effects, or for some of these people, they turn to addiction, they turn to, whatever it was. So the first one might be the hardest. So I apologize for starting off with like a baseball bat, but can we talk about grief?
I love it. Let's.
Okay. Because, so I interviewed Amanda Klutz, famously, sadly, was one of the first people in the public eye. She lost her husband, who was also in the public eye. He was a famous Broadway actor. And, he was one of the first people to contract COVID early on in a public way. And Amanda just fought for him. And unfortunately, he did lose his battle with COVID. And then one other past guest that I would put in this category that I think about all the time is Jessica Jansen. Beautiful girl. And she lost a child on the day of those interviews. And I say those interviews because I actually interviewed both of those women on the same day. Oftentimes I'll go and I'll do a batch of interviews if I'm going to say Los Angeles or Austin or, Miami. And so that was a Los Angeles day. And so I had both Amanda and Jessica on my roster for that day. And I said to my mother, who is also a TV journalist and did interviews for 30 years, I said, Mom, how am I going to do this? How am I going to sit and interview these two women and not lose it? And she gave me some good advice. I actually sat upstairs in my hotel room and I went through my questions and I let myself ugly cry in the hotel room. So by the time I got downstairs for their interviews, I could hold space because I cannot imagine what either of them went through. And Jessica in particular, just being a mother, and listening to her story, which is to lose a child in their first year of life. It seems to me insurmountable. And I think people who haven't been through it think, well, I just couldn't go on. And when you interview these people, their reality is, do I have a choice? I mean, you have to go on, right? Like I have children, I have other children. And so now they're at the jumping off point, the I have to go on point, but they're struggling with seemingly insurmountable grief. Explain to us, Joette, how homeopathy might be able to help.
Well, we have thousands of homeopathic medicines that have been proved. By the way, most of them have been proved through double-blind testing, some of them just clinically, but many of them have also been proved double-blind in a double-blind data arrangement. And so what we do is we look at how is this person suffering from this grief? People experience grief in different ways. One person may grieve by crying incessantly, crying to the point where there's nothing left. And then sometimes at the last minute or even just an hour later, they're laughing almost hysterically. It's as though the central nervous system has gone kaflooey. And the person needs to find that grounding again. And that kind of grief where the pain is beyond comprehension, they talk about it and cry about it and then laugh and then talk and cry and laugh so that the body is the emotions are in overgear. That when it's that intense, often the medicine is Coffea cruda, 200C. Now, why would I choose that? Well, Coffea cruda is very specific for grief, but especially when the central nervous system is on rapid speed, and it's one extreme, another extreme, another extreme, another extreme, and they can't sleep, and they go to sleep, and then they wake up, and there it is again, and then they fall back to sleep, and it's only because of pure exhaustion that they can fall back to sleep, and then they wake up again, and my voice is going. I'm trying to show you how quickly this is happening in this person's life, and it's intense, and it's too big, and they feel as though their central nervous system is going to crash. Not unlike when someone drinks too much coffee. Now, we're not going to have grief from drinking coffee, but that stepped up feeling, that hyperactivity, that central nervous system that feels like it could crack and shatter at any moment, that is a description for the need of the medicine, the homeopathic medicine, Coffea cruda 200C.
Fascinating. So fascinating. So these are
things. Back a minute, though, Jamie. Let's go back. Let's say, I imagine that she could be suffering like that because we don't really know exactly what her symptoms were on a day-to-day basis or into the night. But let's say instead it's simply weeping, quietly weeping, and and she feels a profound sadness, of course, and so we might also think of a remedy that most people who know anything about homeopathy would understand, and that medicine is called Ignatia Amara. Ignatia Amara 200C. And that is when the grief is grand, but it's not making their central nervous system feel as though it's going to crack and shatter. It's just a very deep, horrible sadness. So we have two choices there. We actually have more than that, but without all the specifics, I would say those are the two top medicines that could be considered. And the way they're used is twice daily. A dose of Coffea cruda 200C twice daily, 12 hours apart, morning, night, morning, night, morning, night. And when there is improvement, considerable improvement, you're not going to wipe away grief, the loss of a child. That will never happen. But you want to bring the person to the point where they can at least get up in the morning and take a shower. that they can at least get in the morning and make a cup of coffee and spend time with their spouse and see other people and not be a pile of nerves and a mess. They're still going to suffer, but it might come in waves, and it will not be so overwhelming that they are breaking, that they're at a breaking point. And so it moves it along a little faster, because eventually, even though a woman may lose her child, that never goes away. She could be 85 years old. She's still going to suffer from that to a certain degree, but not on the same level as she would be when it's fresh, a year later, 2 years later, even 3 or 4 years later. So what we want to do is kind of move it along a little faster with this beautiful medicine called Ignatia Amara, or Coffea cruda.